we've got at least about 60 people that's confirmed. So, but I'm also conscious of time. So we're going to kick off. I just want to take you through a brief outline of today's session. Then I'll hand over to our speaker. Our speaker today is Prof. Stein Hekroot. We'll be sharing some thoughts and insights on the topic. Stein will be presenting for about 45 minutes, and then we'll allow 15 minutes for questions and comments. And I'd like you to just make a note of any questions that you do have, and just keep them for the allocated Q&A time. And maybe just some housekeeping rules. The webinar will be recorded. If you can just mute your devices and turn off your video to ensure that the sound quality is optimal. Stein is presenting from Dubai, so there's we want to ensure that the line is as good as possible. And also just when we get to the question and answer time, please just raise your hand so that we can deal with the questions. If you've got a specific question for a specific person, just type in and the person's name, that we know who you're posing the question to. And then lastly, just there will be potentially a bit of delay between ourselves and Stein, given where it's presenting from. Just bear with us. And just a reminder, as always, just to complete the feedback form that will be in the chat window. So please just remember, it will take you about 2 minutes just to complete that, but it's always useful for us to get that feedback. And I think, it's once again important just to show the following slide to you. Let me just get to that. We designed the series of webinars we've designed around a couple of questions that we believe and that we've heard leaders asking in a time like this. And these are the questions. In the center there, you'll see people asking questions about how do I ensure my safety and the safety of my people? How do I keep people engaged? So questions about engagement, what the new normal looks like if there's something like that. How do we respond, recover, and grow the business in a time like this? What does leading look like? Questions related to resilience and how do we create resilient people and a resilient business? And then lastly, some of the factors impacting our people make decisions within in a time like this. So all of that we've actually built into the series of webinars. The objective of today's session is the following. It's talking about understanding ourselves. Stein will deal with understanding ourselves, but also why we struggle with aspects like disruption and uncertainty. You'll share a list of, I think, about 15 leadership skills, future fit leadership skills, but you'll specifically focus on 3 of those, and those are tolerance for ambiguity, sense making, and resilience. And I think it's important just to note that the session will specifically focus on you as a person, as a leader, and not necessarily on team orientated issues or organizational issues, as we deem that to be the essential starting point for long-term adaptation and change. So I think that's all from my side, apart from introducing the speaker. As I said, I want to get to him as quickly as possible. So Stein, just to introduce him, Prof. Stein Hekroot is an international thought leader on topics related to the fields of leadership, strategic thinking, coaching, and people development. He engages with internationally renowned business schools and professional development institutions in these fields. And he also practices as a consultant and he leads his own successful company, a CEO. He's a Harvard Business Review author. He's a Harvard Business School publishing moderator, vice president of the United Arab Emirates University, and creator of the platform for connected leadership framework. So I think that's quite a mouthful. Stein, I think with having said that, I'm going to hand over to you, Stein, to take us further in this webinar. Thank you very much for your time. I think it's around about 6 o'clock on your side. So just before you go to bed, quite a nice. We looking forward to your session. Thanks, Stein.
Hi, Stein. I just think you muted.
All right, let's try that again.
There we go.
My screen is shared.
That's fine, Stein. We can see it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Johan, for the introduction. And also thank you to Western Cape Government, your leaders, esteemed colleagues, for this opportunity. I really very honored, very blessed, and feel very special that you have asked me to engage with this topic during this time. So without any further ado, organizational resilience, sense-making, and tolerance of ambiguity, let me take you into that. I don't need to share any more information regarding myself. I think Johan's done enough on that, so thank you very much for the introduction. Just a very quick webinar structure. What are you in for this afternoon? We're going to just spend a little bit of time on understanding ourselves. Again, it is important for me that we kind of make peace with the struggles we have at the moment, and that we're not so strange and so disappointed in how we're handling it. There's actually a lot of logic why people struggle with disruption and uncertainty. I'm going to take you through a very quick context setting regarding that. Then we're going to get into the future fit leadership skills, tolerance of ambiguity, sense making, and resilience. Now, up front, I want to say what I'm going to leave you with today is I took a listen to all the previous webinars. And one of the things that I thought maybe I should add for today is to give you a process, something practical that you can take back. You can make it a screensaver if you want, or you can print it out and stick it up on your wall. But a process, a 9-step process for how can we, as the Western Cape government, either as an organization or in the different departments of responsibility, implement this process to improve tolerance of ambiguity, to improve our sense making, and to improve our resilience. So by all means, not an academic session. There's enough academic rigor in the material, but I'm going to try and make it as practical as possible and leave you with a sort of a takeaway to take home or back to the organization and implement these things. So let's start with context, okay? I kind of like this session because there's a moment of truth where we kind of look at it and we go, okay, now we understand why it is that we're struggling with uncertainty. There's an hypothesis. This is not my hypothesis. Much of it has been taken from the work of Albert Einstein that says that the world as we know it today is a product of our thinking. And therefore, our thinking ability, because thinking precedes all our actions, okay? How we think is what based on things that we assume, and that sort of determines how we're going to behave. So our thinking ability is guided by what appears to be, by what appears for us to be something that we are more comfortable with, okay? Our thinking ability is guided by what appears to be more comfortable for us. And that is why we're struggling with uncertainty. So you might say, okay, so what? I'm going to explain it a little bit more. When we take decisions, Snowden and Boone gives us this Sullivan framework. Basically, we have two opposing states within which we have to take decisions. The one is more ordered on the left-hand side, and the other one is more unordered on the right-hand side. So if things are simple, it's normally easy for us to take decisions because we categorize and segment it, and it's kind of easy to take decisions in that time. Even when things are very, very complicated, it's still quite easy to take a decision because complicated means something is very, very difficult, but it's still static. So if we were a bunch of Ferrari engineers, for instance, and I drive a Ferrari into a warehouse and I ask you, listen, take the Ferrari apart and put it back together again, you will be able to do it based on your knowledge and expertise. And it's quite doable, very complicated, but doable because the thing is standing still. Where we struggle as people, as human beings, to take decisions is when things move into the unordered state. There's two there. The one is chaotic. So something happens and I need to react immediately. And sometimes it's a simple chaotic. So like there's a fire that breaks out. You'll see the smoke coming in from underneath the door and you will immediately act and run out. Or there'll be an alarm that goes off and you will run. You will not think. You will think about it afterwards. Sometimes, however, this chaos is much more complex. It's when things keep on changing all the time, but it doesn't stop. It's almost like me asking you to do the same with a Ferrari while it's driving. Or if you have a garden at home, I ask you to go home tonight, take out all the plants and trees, and then put them back together again. You know as well as I do that more than half of these plants and trees will die. Why? Well, because the biological system, nature, continues evolving, continues changing as you are doing what you want to do. And now the roots have become exposed to oxygen and now it's a mess. So those are the two states, and we are much more comfortable and trained actually to take decisions in the ordered state as opposed to the unordered state. Let me prove it to you very quickly. Work with me here. I'm going to go very quickly. I'm going to show you a bunch of numbers on a screen. That will be your next slide. When you see these numbers, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. And during these 10 seconds, I want you to see whether you can find the 1, and then I want you to find the 2, the 3, and the 4. So I want you to, in sequence, find the next number. When I say stop, just write the highest number that you found on a piece of paper. We're going to come back to that. Okay? Yes.
I just want to, we're still seeing your initial slide, your opening slide, platform for connected leadership. I just want to check whether the slides are rolling.
Oh my
goodness. From your side?
Yes, they are. Why is that then? I'm going to stop share and then I'll share again.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let me just, you are still seeing my original slide?
We're not seeing anything at this point in time, but...
Can you make me help us, please? I have pushed share. Okay, there's the share. I am pushing share.
Okay.
Okay.
Choose your slides.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. And now I go to that. Okay.
There we go.
Right.
We can see your...
Okay, I'm so sorry.
No,
sorry.
it's fine. Just
Thank
move
you,
the deck and see whether they move along.
Okay. They're moving?
There we go. There we go. Thanks, Stein. Yeah, there we go.
All right. Okay, let's play catch up here. Okay, this was the structure I gave you. And then this was where I said that our thinking basically is comfortable with, you know, or our thinking ability is guided by what appears to be more comfortable for us. And this was the Cinnamon framework that I showed you there. You see the ordered and the unordered. My apologies for that. Now, it's very important that you see the next slide. We're going to play a quick game. I'm going to show you random numbers. I want you to find the 1 and then in sequence the 2, the 3, and see how high you can count within 10 seconds. All right. Once you hear me telling you to stop, then we're going to go to the next slide. All right. You ready? 3, 2, 1. Right. Stop. Write down your number, please. The highest number that you reached. And it's okay if it was only a 3 or 4, it's quite normal. Now, I'm going to show you exactly the same slide again. This time, I'm going to place a grid, a matrix on top of the numbers. Again, I want you to start with a 1 and then see how high you can go in sequence. I'm again giving you the same amount of time. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, please write down the number. Now, Johan, can you see people texting in a chat box?
I can see, yes, Stein, I can.
Okay, if you're going to ask people, if you can very quickly just type in your number that you did on the first exercise without the matrix. Just type the number, how high you got. And Johan, if you can maybe just read them out to me as they're typing them in.
Okay, Stein, I see 6, 3, 5, 4, 2, 2, 4. So nothing higher than 6. Okay. Nothing higher than 6 at the moment.
Okay, then
6 being the highest.
All right, stop there for me. Okay, people, I want you to again type in the number, but this time the number as high as you got when I put the matrix on the slide. And Johan, if you can read them out for me again, please.
Okay, I've got 14, 36, 17, 91.
All right, okay. All right,
54.
Thank you very much. All right, it proves the point. Okay, it proves the point that our brain functions easier when things are structured and ordered. The chaos is still the chaos. I showed you the numbers. The first slide, the second slide is exactly the same. But what you probably managed to do in the second slide is you saw the matrix, you saw the grid, and you very quickly figured out that, hey, 1 is in this block, 2 is in that block, and 3, and then your brain just kind of ran with the sequence. That's why it was possible for you to reach such a high number. And although that's a good thing, that's also a problem, because we talk about thought paradigm evolvement, specifically in leadership and in strategy, both for government and non-governmental. I'm going to go as far back as the Second World War. After the Second World War, most organizations took the form of a kind of a general-like style management. Okay, so you would look at a landscape, you would segment, you would categorize, and you order your people around. In that same time, we had the introduction in 1960 of the SWOT, something that you have probably done, the SWOT analysis, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then you've probably also looked at PESTEL, politics, economy, social trend changes, and technology. You might even have looked at Porter's 5 forces. In business, we do this a lot. What I'm trying to illustrate to you is that most of the tools that have been developed over the decades have been developed on the basis of segmenting and categorizing things, trying to take things that's very complex, very complicated, and making it simple for us. The challenge in that, however, is that we have become lazy. So during the 1970s, when we had the oil crisis, for instance, you have stability and you have disruption. And people have only 2 reactions to that. They either try to fix the disruption, in other words, come up with alternative sources of energy, or maybe a different economic model, or they wait until the disruption goes away and things return to normal. And most of the time, if you look at history, we have a tendency of waiting. Okay, so we wait for the uncertainty, the chaos to go away, and then we can carry on as per normal again. However, it's not that simple. It's not that easy anymore. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world was flattened. And now we find ourselves in this forced industrial revolution where everything is connected. So what basically has happened is we have moved ever since the late 1980s in the world of work and in the world of government as a global society. We have moved from the ordered state, and we spend much more time in the state of complexity and the state of chaos. And that's that top arrow that you see there. But what your brain keeps on doing is it keeps on trying to pull you back into the space of orderedness, where things are simple and complicated. And unfortunately, those two are in conflict with one another. What you need to be able to do during the corona time and during this pandemic and crisis that you have in South Africa is you need to be able to manage amidst this uncertainty. And for that, you require future fit leadership skills. Some of the skills you might recognize. Some of them are very new. There's a total of 15. Johan mentioned that I work along with Harvard Business School publishing in the region. So we have fresh information and fresh data all the time, which tells us that for the current pandemic and the so-called new normal that your government is preparing for, these are the key skills that you will require. Curiosity, dealing with paradox, things that seem to be opposing one another, tolerance of ambiguity, learning, growth mindset, really being open for new ideas, design thinking, how to make some sort of order out of this mess and chaos that we have at the moment, sense making, visioning and mobilizing. Can you actually see this new normal? What does it look like? And how can you mobilize people for that? Adaptability, because things chop and change all the time, as you have become very accustomed to by now, and in the rest of the world as well. Even here in Dubai, we have differences between the different federal states. It changes all the time. The regulation changes overnight. Cultural competence, collaboration, change resilience, resourcefulness, leading with authority, and connectedness. So out of this, we have chosen tolerance of ambiguity, sense making, and the resilience. Now, the question was posed, why specifically these ones? Again, with the help of our intelligence agencies and other research houses, these seem to be the key skills that's applied and exercised by most of the COVID scenarios that we have with a high level of success in terms of managing it. So considering the limitation of time, these will be the 3 that we go through. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get you as a human being, you as a person, as the people, to be okay in this state of disorder, where you're hovering between ordered and unordered. So we're giving you a tool. We cannot change the state. You can't change the external environment. You have to adapt to the external environment. But the question is, what if the leadership skills that I have been taught, what if they're not sufficient? What if they're not good enough? What if they simply just doesn't provide me with what I need right now? Well, simple answer. Then you need to acquire new leadership skills. And remember, new leadership skills is something that we bring through the research to the world of governance and business all the time. You take something like emotional intelligence, for instance. It's brand new. It originated back to the start of the 1990s. So it's not unfamiliar to have a new leadership skill that's being presented in terms of how to deal with the challenge. I gave you some pre-reading to do. There was an article on the new normal that I sent you. There was a case study that I sent you on the Fukushima plant. And then there was an article on resilience. So if you have read that, great. If you haven't, it's okay. You can always read it afterwards. But I am kind of bolding what I'm going to say here on these articles. Allow me just for one slide to be slightly academic, because here I have to give you the correct definition. If we look at tolerance of ambiguity, the definition is to be comfortable with uncertainty. Now, even though we know this, people have probably said it to you, maybe you've even said it to yourself, or you have said it to others. Based on this small little exercise that we just played right now, understand how difficult this actually is, because your brain, by default, is not comfortable with uncertainty. Your brain is comfortable when things are boxed, segmentized, categorized, when it's simple. And you have to now train behaviors that makes your brain comfortable with uncertainty, with something that's totally unpredictable, that's conflicting. The one says this, the other one says this stat indicates that, that stat. I mean, in your country, you have variances in the stats that comes forward in terms of cases and testing and positive and negative, all those kind of things. But you're comfortable with it. It doesn't mean that you don't care. It's just you're comfortable with it, because tolerance of ambiguity gives you the ability to manage things for what they are. Comfortable with uncertainty, unpredictability, conflicting direction, multiple demands, and to still operate effectively in an uncertain environment. Not easy, but this is your environment at the moment. Even if we look at the trends, when we started to work, do the research on COVID, we obviously, as Johan mentioned, I'm involved as an organization in this, so we have been right in the forefront of research from the start. When in the UAE we were locked down in the beginning of March, we could very quickly, if you look at the blue and the pink dots there, we could kind of start to predict on the basis of history. So it's a typical way in which we do projections, and there's algorithms that's run, and sort of very intelligent people, statisticians and mathematicians that will say to you, are you heading for a peak, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. But now we have seen, insofar as COVID is concerned, that we can't even work on these predictions, because tomorrow is not a continuation of yesterday. Tomorrow, and I try to illustrate it just by that red up and down graph there, it's confusing. Then it's lower, then it's higher. And it's like that globally. Look at where the UK has started and look at where they are today. Look at what we have started, where we are today. Look at where South Africa has started, very strict, strong lockdown, with a high likelihood based on the trends that would successfully curb the virus. Now it looks to be totally contra that. So when our graph breaks, when your graphs break with the norm, ambiguity confuses us, because you now look at this and you say it doesn't make sense. It's okay. How do I become tolerant with ambiguity? This is the first process that I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you 3 of these, all right? So it's a 9-step process. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. Many organizations and governments are using these 9 steps to get people to be tolerant with ambiguity, to be okay with this uncertainty. The first thing is you have to have a starting point. So you at least need to know, what is the problem that I need to solve? Because as it says in stage 2 and 3, you have to have clear priorities and choose the highest priority items. Your biggest challenge, what should the focus be? Saving lives or saving livelihoods? It's such a difficult question. How do I treat both of these? How do I put both of these at the top of the list? You have to ignore distractions. Don't do too much. In times of chaos and pandemic, people try to do too much. They try to do everything. Weigh the options and select, then commit. It's very important. Around the table, when you have your meetings, when you have your discussions, disagree with one another as much as you like. Please, you have to. because complexity is better served through diversity than through expertise. This is not the time for the expert to say how we should do things. This is the time to bring as many diverse opinions into the room as possible. But once you've made the decision, this is the priority, this is the highest priority, this is what we're going to focus on, then commit to that. Don't start a second meeting in the corridor once you leave the meeting room. Choose the words and communicate wisely. It's very, very important that you, at least in your communication, eradicate any further confusion and uncertainty, and that you don't contribute to that. And here, if you remember nothing tonight, it will be okay. If you remember nothing from this hour that I'm spending with you, it would be okay. But do your level best to remember the next step. Step number 6. It's the most important. As a matter of fact, I can do an entire webinar just on this. Let me take you through it. Manage the assumptions of what people hear versus your motivation. Manage the assumptions of what people hear versus your motivation. I'm going to try and explain the meaning of that by referring to a movie. If you have seen the movie Captain Sully, it's the pilot that managed to land a Boeing safely and save all the lives on board of the Boeing in the Hudson River. It happened a couple of years ago. There's recently been a movie that was made about it. I think Clint Eastwood made the movie. Now, at the time, these two pilots are in the air, okay? There's a bird strike, they lose both engines. And then the first thing the pilot starts to do is he starts, he obviously radios back to ground, to air control, air traffic control. And now they give him options. You can either go here or there in terms of making an emergency landing. And he then very quickly figures out, because he has years of experience, that he can't make it to any of these options. He turns to his co-pilot, and this they found afterwards in the research. It's a fantastic case study that was made by this. Turns to his co-pilot and he says, I'm going to put her down in the Hudson. Now, his motivation for saying that is not spelled out. He's just saying, I'm going to put her down in the Hudson. His motivation, it was confirmed afterwards in an interview with him, was I wanted to assure the co-pilot that I'm going to safely land this plane in the river and we're going to save all lives. His co-pilot, however, when he was questioned about it, says that when the captain said, I'm going to put her down in the Hudson, he assumed we are going to crash, the plane is going to break up, and there's a high likelihood of casualties. Listen to the motivation of the captain saying, I'm going to put her down in the Hudson. His motivation for saying that is to install hope. But the assumption of the co-pilot is, oh hell, we're going to crash and people are going to die. So when you share communication with citizens, with people out there, colleagues, the health workers, make very sure that you manage this assumption and that they're not hearing something different. That's the most important in this 9 steps. Trust your intuition based on experience. In the movie also, it says brace and impact. Now that's stage 8. You have to share with people. If you're working towards a new normal, you have to be able to envision that new normal. You have to tell them what they're in for. So brace, we're going to hit the water, prepare for impact. Okay? They're not saying prepare for crash. Like the WHO, for instance, if I can use an example, and I say this with no disrespect, sometimes when I listen to the leaders of the WHO, man, it's just doom and gloom. The worst is still to come. It's like we are heading towards the end. No, choose your words. Not lie to people, but choose your words. What do you need to get ready for in terms of the new normal? And then get the team on the same page as you and lobby for buy-in. So that's the first tolerance of ambiguity, 9 steps. I want to move to future fit leadership skills. By the way, if you have questions, which you probably have, please make a note of those questions. We are going to come back and I'm going to deal with all of these separately at the end of the session. I shared with you the article very briefly. For those of you who did not read it, I'll explain to you what the article is about. But a little bit of an academic again, definition of sense making. Sense making refers to how we structure the unknown. Okay, so what do you use in your brain? How do you structure things that you don't know? Unknown through, listen to this, beautiful, using experience and understanding, so as to be able to act. So this is about you, your experience and how you understand it. It hovers between that. It's almost like a reiterative process, okay? Understanding, experience, trying, probing, understanding. That's what sense making is all about. It's not about somebody else explaining to you how things work. It's about you figuring it out. It is adaptive behavior in which understanding and experience shape each other. So that's the definition. What does it mean in practice? Those of you who haven't read the case study, very briefly, we had a tsunami that hit the coast of Japan in 2011. We lost one nuclear reactor. We managed to save the other one. And the question is, what did the guy do? What did the leader do in the one that they saved? He, by and large, primarily used sense making to save that plant in how he led his people. Now, why I share this with you is the volatility in the environment. What happened on that nuclear power plant is very similar to what you are experiencing. And that's the great news about it. Many people say, oh, we've never had a pandemic like this before. We don't know what to do. That's not true. We have had examples of similar critical, chaotic situations, maybe on a smaller scale, but very similar. And from that, we can extract learning so that at least we know what it is that we need to do. Sense making is one of the key skills. Now, how did the leader do it? He opened up communication and the planning process. He made it very transparent. But at the end of the day, the team requires diligence and trust, absolute trust. You have to fall back on your technical competence, what it is that you can and cannot do. And then the big thing is to have knowledge of the case at hand. Western Cape Government 2020 and beyond, your challenge, lives and livelihoods. You still have to take decisions. You are operating in the unordered state. I'm giving you tools that can make you comfortable to deal in that state. Because the biggest challenge that you have is you have to now persuade people to act against their survival instincts. Think about it. You're sending health workers into so-called hot spots. It's exactly what happened on this plant, this nuclear plant, where people actually wanted to evacuate, inform their families, run away, and the leader managed to keep them there through sense making, making things transparent, communicating, checking decisions. Your challenge is to persuade people to act against their survival instinct. And as we all know, your survival instinct, that's the strongest instinct. So the trick here is really to acknowledge and share that you are uncomfortable, that you are struggling. You know, so in reacting to this unexpected during Corona, the question is, how do I get comfortable to share? Have groups, maybe you have it already, share groups and decide, how am I going to share the burden of uncertainty? Do not try and carry it all on your own. You have to now more than ever in your family life, in your social circle, and specifically in an organization, the government, you have to share this burden on your team members' shoulders. It's exactly what Masuda did, the guy that led them in this nuclear power plant. What is it that you should refrain from, specifically as politicians and as servants of the public? What should you try to refrain from? One is passionate speeches, and a lot of times because of the nature of your work, this is very difficult because these are things that politicians are very good at, making passionate speeches. Now is not the time. Don't simplify things. Acknowledge the complexity, acknowledge the uncertainty. But then, what should you do? Work on data and empower people to prompt their own resourcefulness. This is not a time to just bark the instruction from the top. You have to rely on people, their own resourcefulness, and empower them for that. Again, it relates back to diversity. Very quickly, I'm conscious of the time, keeping my one eye on that. 9-step process for improving, enhancing, and installing sense-making as a skill, a leadership skill in your organization. Acknowledge the reality. Share the burden of uncertainty. Revise and communicate the known. Don't confuse people by sharing the unknown. Share the known, work the facts, adapt as things change. Maintain the focus of hope. Take nothing for granted. Don't be relaxed. You see, some of the leaders were very relaxed. To use the UK again, if you think Boris, in the beginning, the president said, don't worry, give me 21 days and we'll have this wrapped up. No, nothing is for granted. There's no discrimination when it comes to this virus. Recalibrate your facts all the time, and then iteratively create continuity with your team to try and restore order. Those are the 9 steps for sense making. Moving to the last one, resilience, very quickly. Again, I shared an article with you on organizational resilience. It's an introduction to a resilience framework. There's a lot of work that we've done with this framework here, and it's also been acknowledged by BDO Global. So we received quite a good acclaim for this framework. Now, Johan mentioned in the beginning that we're going to focus on the individual. Yes, we're focusing on the individual, but with this last one, I'm also giving you a little bit in terms of your organization. It starts with the individual. Individual resilience is your ability to adapt and to bounce back quickly in times of stress. It's okay if you're being knocked down to the planks of the boxing ring the past 4 or 5 months a number of times. It's quite understandable. As a matter of fact, it's normal. The question is, are you getting up? Are you getting back up? Do you have resilience? Challenge is not over, and we all know that. But this is what resilience is all about. That capacity to bounce back from life's pitfalls, your work challenging pitfalls that you have at the moment. In essence, it's about balance. Now, we have to acknowledge the challenges that we have as a government. And I'm sure you do. I don't have to tell you that you have to do that. But let's not hide it. Let's not make the passionate speeches. Let's work the knowledge. Let's be open and transparent. Because the greatest challenge that organizations, governments have in terms of becoming high reliability organizations is, one, people's fixed mindset resistance. It goes back to that assumptions that people make. You say one thing, you have a motivation of saving lives, they hear something else. They don't hear that you want to save lives, they hear that, oh, you're going to kill the economy. Of course, what we're doing at the moment has a hugely detrimental impact on the economy, but that's not what we're saying. So manage the assumption. Why are we doing what we're doing? Try to break that fixed mindset of resistance, both in the organization and also externally to the organization, the recipients of the message that you try to carry forward. Systems and processes are sometimes too difficult to change. You don't have a lot of time here. It's not like I'm a change management consultant and I'm coming to you and I'm giving you this beautiful 8-step Kotter out of the textbook change management process. Man, we are in crisis mode. These things need to happen overnight. And that's why one of the things I've mentioned before is that we have to empower. We have to rely on the resourcefulness of other people in the hierarchy. This cannot come from one individual. So we need to try and simplify the systems and the processes. I can give you a simple example. Here in Dubai, we worked with an organization. It's typical if an organization gets large that they build a hierarchy. So we had 6 people that reported directly into the CEO. So that would typically be, the head of marketing, head of finance, head of sales, head of distribution. It's a normal hierarchical structure. COVID hit, and what they did is they flattened the infrastructure, the organogram, hierarchical structure overnight. And they had 22 people reporting into the CEO. Weekly, a daily get together in the morning, all virtual, online, 1 hour, what's happening, what's not happening. Okay, it's just an example I'm giving you. Systems and processes, if it's too difficult to change, you've got to flatten them during this time. And then the thing that we struggle with most is that we're not looking at slow-paced change. This is radical change, because it's not just about managing the pandemic. It's also about managing the impact of how we are managing at the moment, relooking our tax base, relooking our economic system, relooking how we are going to deal with the economic impact of COVID. It's a radical change that's required. And that's probably, I would say, what you're trying to achieve, and Johan has explained this to me very beautiful, thank you, Johan, that really helped, is this new normal that you are building towards. But we have to be comfortable and understand that that new normal will be radically different, change the way, the very fundamental thinking and systems to become a high reliability organization. Again, leaving you with a 9-step process. How do I build resilience into the organization? A couple of things here. I want to spend a little bit more time on these 9 steps. The first one is what we call a dynamic leadership shift. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we replace the leader. It just means that we leverage on alternative skills. In other words, do you know in your organization how many people might have skills which is now much more needed than their normal job? Maybe their job, yes, there was a job specification. They applied for the job, they went through an interview process, and maybe they're just a data capturer. I don't know. But maybe they have another skill. Like me, for instance, many years ago, I think about 20 years ago, I did a course in deep sea, in deep wreck diving. So I've dived to a maximum depth of 35 meters. Now, it's not about the fact that I dive very deep, but along with that course, I also had to do CPR. I also had to manage or learn how to manage fear. So when you see a shark, what's the drill? What do you do with your adrenaline? How do you compose yourself? So those are skills that, here I'm the president of a university. People don't know I have that skill, but during a pandemic, those skills can be very, very relevant, because one of the things that people struggle with is, what do I do with my fear? Man, I can give you some tips and guidance on how to manage your fear. So leverage on alternative skills. Send out a question and find out who has got other skills that's more applicable right now, so that you have step 3, a systematic intervention, and that you empower operational teams. Highest level of success that we have seen, government and non-government, is empowering lower levels of the organic structure, lower levels of the hierarchy, to be resourceful, to take decisions. It makes them feel empowered, and they're coming up with better new ideas of how to challenge things on the ground. Learn continuously. Nobody knows everything here. Nobody knows everything in any event, but learn continuously. Have an open mind. Ask questions, be curious, try to figure this out. This is not just about firefighting. This is about learning. Select a multi-channel for your communication, not just one. But now remember what I said. Keep it simple. Okay, so like step 7 there. Factual, not I believe, I think, we shall. No, factual. These are the facts. Reassure people of what it is that you're doing, what you're implementing. And do the communication frequent. Nothing freaks people out like silence. We were all children at one stage. Maybe you have your own right now. If you want to really, punish a child, tell the child to go sit in the room and wait. I'll talk to you later. It's a horrible thing to do, but it's a good example to illustrate. Because while the child is sitting there now, the child's worrying. What's the punishment really going to be? Don't do that. Talk frequently. Manage the relationship with the citizens, and then maybe this is, I'm not a politician, so I say this with a lot of respect, but maybe this is a time also to collaborate with competitors, no matter the ideological and political differences. Corona has no discrimination. It's not one party's, it's not one province's problem in terms of how to manage it. It's a collective. So 9 steps on building resilience. That's the 9 steps that I give you there. All right, so that concludes my part of the webinar. Judging by my clock, we have 16 minutes for Q&A. Johan, if you could maybe lead me through the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Stein. Thank you very much. We've got at least 2 questions at this point in time, and I just want to ask people to also to use the chat box to pose any additional questions. Arun Muhammad. Arun, if I can ask you just to pose your question directly to Stein, and he can then respond. Arun.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for a very excellent presentation. I just was wondering about, is it simply about tolerance of ambiguity, or is it more than that? Is it tolerance of complexity? Because the variables we're dealing with are more than the binary that is implied in the word ambiguity. Thanks.
Okay, excellent question. I'm going to flip back to the slide. Just give me 1 second. Okay, excellent question. And the reason why it's an excellent question is, you are quite right. We are actually confronted with complexity, which in terms of the Sullivan framework I highlighted earlier sits on the unordered state. But because we are not fit, meaning we're not that good to think and plan and operate in a complex, unordered state, that leads to ambiguity. So we kind of don't know what to make with the trends. We kind of don't know what to make with the graphs. So the aspect of complexity that you've mentioned, it actually precedes the ambiguity. Now, if I manage the complexity better, yes, that will inadvertently also spill over to me, not necessarily managing ambiguity a bit better, but I will eliminate some of the ambiguity. So the two are very closely related, but in sequence, it's a slightly different thought process that I go through. In dealing with the complexity, you will see that what I try to illustrate in this slide is what are the stages of decision taking. So complex, it says very clear, I probe, then I make sense, then I respond. So it's a little bit of a longer time frame. So if as you become better with this, and you probably have by now in terms of the pandemic, you don't just call out the action. You probe a little bit, and then you kind of make sense from the data and the reactions, and then you respond. And if you do it that way, in a way, you eliminate, you decrease the ambiguity that normally follows. So yes, very closely related to one another. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, Stein. Marsha Corsten has also got a question. Marsha, you've got a question about resilience and bouncing back and bouncing forward. If you can just pose the question specifically.
Thanks, Johan, and thanks, Stein. So basically my question is, if you look at a lot of writings and you hear a lot about resilience, and some people talk about bouncing back and some people talk about bouncing forward, and I think you made reference also to it's about balance. And I think bouncing forward is almost more synonymous with what we are now saying is the new normal, because we're not necessarily returning to the previous state, but we need to see how we adapt to a new state. So I just wanted your views on this, because I can see that, it's something that's been used interchangeably. So from your perspective, is it different? And then also, how would it then link to some of the processes that you've mentioned? Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the question. Again, very excellent and a very comprehensive question. Okay, I'm going to try and answer by this. Let me just get to the slide. Okay. I'm going to try and answer the question by addressing the aspect of balance. So, and in my answer, there might be some assumptions I make, and I apologize for that. But I don't want to make it too open-ended and too up in the air. I want to try and at least bring out the opinion that we have regarding this. As a society and as a human race, we tend to always need to be pushed to the edge of the cliff and sometimes even fall over the thing before we realize what are the imbalances that we have in ourselves, our teams, our households, and then larger, more for government, very applicable is in our societal differences. So if you take something like the inequalities that we have in a society, people are aware of these inequalities, but in a normal day-to-day operation of a country, you don't necessarily as a citizen see the inequalities. And you might live in the poor side of this equality, you might live in the rich side of the equality, but there's not necessarily a cross view because things are normal and there's no real reason, other than your social consciousness to be aware of these inequalities. And sometimes it's pushed forward by politicians, by religious leaders, by societal leaders that there's these inequalities and we need to do something about it. But it's still a little bit of a stretch to get everybody to buy into this and to make them realize that, hey, you know what, we're one citizen, one country, one human race, let's help one another. What something like the pandemic, specifically the lockdown, has done is it's highlighted these inequalities, because specifically with the help or curse sometimes of social media, you could very clearly see how some citizens are going through the lockdown and it looks all fine and dandy and it's, it's card games and they relax, they have big houses, and it's okay for them to be locked down for 3 weeks. And then there's others which are crammed together in a kind of a township or a squatter camp environment. Now, this has always been there. These inequalities have always been there. But what a pandemic does is it forces it to surface to the top because it's now news, both formal and social news. So when we talk about balance, it's about going back to basics. And the first thing that we do in terms of balance is you start with self. We have progression in terms of balance. So first it's you, your ability to reflect, to become aware of your strengths, your weaknesses, what are the areas that you need to manage better. Your own fear, sitting at home, worrying, losing your job, whatever the case might be. But you're very much, during a pandemic, we are very much and first and foremost confronted with ourselves. Because as it is, most people are afraid of dying, or most people don't want to die. Okay, so there's a fear factor there, and that's individual by nature. Then the second thing is you have to try and manage that and overcome that as an individual. How do I now take that to my team? And my team can be my household, my circle of friends, or also my team at work. There we need to be very strong with building relations. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of sharing the burden, communicating, being open and honest. It's okay as a leader to be vulnerable during these times, but that's the next level. So I have to try and now balance my relationship that I have with team. And how I do it during a pandemic is different from how I do it under normal circumstances. But again, what the pandemic teaches us is, hey, why can you do it during the pandemic? Why can you not do it during normal circumstances? Because it should be done during normal circumstances as well. Then yours, very specifically, the organization, the new normal, bouncing forward. There's this word that crept into managerial jargon called disruption. And a lot of people would use this word out of context. They typically think something like disruption is only applicable to Uber taxi services because Uber doesn't look like a taxi service and it came along and it disrupted the service. Or Airbnb doesn't look like a hotel, but it does the same thing. That's not really disruption. That's more innovative thinking and the use of technology. Disruption is when things are totally different from what it used to be. And it's beyond, it's outside of your control. And that's what's happening during a pandemic. It's not about what government says, how we should react to it. It's about the virus itself. The thing is out of control. You can't see it, and that's the disruptor. It's like being, it's like, just being afraid of something and you can't see it. So here the balance is very much dependent on how I'm going to create balance in the organization. One, to have a new normal that you're working towards is a good thing. Be able to envision that and tell people this is what we're heading to. You might not be right. It might change again. That's why you also have to be adaptable around the twists and turns. But the balance starts with you managing yours, then the team, and then managing this disruption in the organization. From there's two more levels. The one is societal leadership, which as a government, first and foremost, I think that's probably your biggest priority. So how do I lead society, all pockets of society? How do I address the inequality that surfaced through the pandemic? And how do I even now, during the pandemic, make sure that you don't have some sort of discrimination that creeps in, a new form of discrimination that creeps in because you're treating certain pockets of society different from others. And you might have to because of the virus and because of the increase in certain areas because of the pandemic. But you have to treat it in such a way that people share the burden. So the key skill for individual is reflect, for team is to build relations, for organization is to manage the disruption, and for societal leader is to share the burden. And the last one is world. Not as applicable. World is more where we work with large-scale international organizations. It's about sharing our resources, sharing planet Earth. There's more of an environmental, a green argument that we have around there. So very apt question. Yes, there's a lot spoken about resilience, a lot more now than before, but the balance effectively refers to those four levels. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Stein. We've got time, I think, for one more question from Michael Hendrickson. Michael?
Oh, hi. Thanks very much, Stein. This has been very valuable. As I note in my, it's part of the adding to the toolbox. You cannot have enough tools, I take it. But it's also important that I think as you add to the toolbox, you have to a certain extent, not only rely on certain tools all the time. You need to know to unlearn to use some tools and when not to use, because you built up a sort of a history, a muscle history of when this happens, this is how I react. You go to certain tools every time. And I think that to a certain extent, if you're a lawyer, for example, you always look at logic. I'm looking for the golden thread, and then I work and I can draw myself crazy. And that also then is linked into the approach of sense making also, because typically, when we're faced with something which is unprecedented, it's new, and therefore we want to describe it in terms of the old or the past. Typically, the most famous one you'd know is the issue of the horseless carriage. How did they describe the new automobile? They talked about a horseless carriage. And in that way, you can actually disguise what the potential as well as the as dangers are, because you sort of, your sense making process is one of, I feel comfortable with something in the past, I know, and therefore I will deal with it. And in that process, you actually disguise what you're actually dealing with. So I think what you're also talking about is even the approach to sense making. You must also be open to using these various skills. Thanks.
Excellent comment. If I can maybe just quickly add to that, and that's where the diversity comes in, because you might see the flat nose screwdriver that you might use, but somebody else coming, different people see different things and see things differently. They might actually have the solution that you're looking for, and a lot of times it doesn't come from the expert in that field. It just comes from a different view. So yeah, excellent point. Thank you so much.
Stein, I think that's basically it. I'm just going to have maybe one or two closing comments. Then Hilton Arons, I see you still on the line. I would love you, because you're always a good summarizer of things, but I'd just like you, Hilton, maybe just to share your key takeouts of the session just before we close. But I think, Stein, from my side, when we look at skills like ambiguity and sense making and resilience, sometimes it's not always things that people can easily get their hands around and wrap their brains around it. It's sometimes difficult to get hold of and take hold of these things. Yeah. I think what you've helped us today is you've helped us to explore that a bit further and given us some practical tools to unpack that in a very meaningful way. So I really want to thank you. Thanks for the time and thanks for those practical tools. So Hilton, I'd really appreciate if you can maybe just share in summary your key takeouts from the session.
Good evening, Stein, and thanks, Johan. Stein, thank you very much for this session. The key things that I've taken out of this session is the fact that you've now challenged my own mental models. So I have, as Michael called it, a toolkit, and you work according to your mental models. And the current situation, the current environment actually requires us to think differently and to think more progressively in terms of how we tackle the specific challenge, the new normal and the way forward, and also how we lead. But importantly, not just about how we lead, also how we take our people along with us and making sure that our people are always on board and they're always informed about what our intentions are. And it's often we have these brilliant leaders and they make comments or they steer us in a certain direction, or we steer our people in a certain direction, and without explaining, and we just assume people know exactly where we're going towards and what our intentions are, and we do not, and then we miss one another. So that to me was also a key one, the fact that we need to communicate, making sure our people are on board, and not having that silence and uncertainty, because the bigger silence or the longer the silence, the greater the uncertainty, and you need your team on board. And also the other key thing was when the issue that you've mentioned about the Japanese example, I think that was quite critical and quite useful. Similar situation, two different results, and it depends on how you manage that specific environment. And it much depends on the leader also, because we had the Hudson River incident, and I've not seen the movie, but I've read the articles at that stage. And it was once again an issue of being innovative and an innovative solution to a problem, but you needed to think, the person needed to think on his feet, or the captain needed to think on his feet at that stage. And also taking the accountability, knowing that he's making a decision, he's dragging a lot of people with him, and taking the accountability. And that requires boldness also on our part as leaders, that you need to understand that when you make a decision and you take your people along the ride with you, that you need to take the accountability also, because people look up to you when you take the accountability for the things, for the decisions that's been made. But from our side, I thank for a very challenging and a thought-provoking presentation. I think it was, as somebody said on this chat, it was spot on and something that we needed at this stage. And then to Johan and team, once again, a brilliant presentation. And thank you very much for scheduling this for us, because it does help us in our thinking and the way that we manage our own people and the way that we add value to our organization, being the Western Cape government, but also national government and to our citizens. So, Stein, lastly, thank you very much for this presentation. We really do appreciate it. And I'm hoping it's not the last time that we hear from you or engage you in this series.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hilton, and I just want to commend you. I think you've just been a role model for dealing with ambiguity, because Hilton didn't know up front that I'm going to ask him to summarize and share learning. So I think he dealt with that exceptionally well. So well done, Hilton. Folks, there's been questions about whether we're going to share the slides. Absolutely, we're going to share the slides. So you'll have those templates that Stein referred to. You'll have that in the slides. Lastly, just remember to give us feedback. The next session is on the, let me just quickly look at, it's on the 19th of August, our next session with Marianne Roux, which is going to be about adaptive leadership specifically. Just a reminder to do the feedback form. And the last very important thing, I want to thank our City of Cape Town colleagues that joined us for this. I think it's a historic event that we together, and hopefully we'll see you for the rest of them. So Stein, thank you very much, and all the best to all of you. Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe. Good luck. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.